Maya Richardson's hands trembled as she held the eviction notice, the paper thin and official, in a way that made her stomach tighten. 30 days. That was all the time she had left before her children would lose the only home they had ever known. The words blurred as she read them again, searching for some loophole, some phrase she had missed that might offer a way out. There was nothing. Just the cold mathematics of rent unpaid and patience exhausted. She folded the notice carefully and placed it in the kitchen drawer where she kept all the other papers she could not afford to think about too deeply. Medical bills from her daughter's asthma treatments, overdue utility warnings, a notice from the school about fees for the spring field trip that she knew she would have to decline with an apologetic note. The drawer closed with a soft click that felt too final. Outside the apartment window, the city moved with its usual indifference. Cars passed. People walked with purpose toward destinations that did not include her problems. Maya pressed her forehead against the cool glass and allowed herself a moment of stillness before her daughter called from the bedroom, asking if dinner was ready yet. She was 32 years old, though some mornings she felt decades older. Her reflection in the bathroom mirror showed the evidence clearly enough. Dark circles beneath her eyes that no amount of concealer could fully hide. Hair pulled back in a ponytail that had started the day neat, but now hung loose and tired. She had been beautiful once, or so people had told her. Now she was simply functional, moving through each day with the kind of efficiency that came from having no choice. The divorce had been finalized 3 years earlier, leaving her with 2 children, a battered sedan that needed constant repairs, and a job at a call center that paid just enough to keep them hovering above complete disaster. Her ex-husband sent child support when he remembered, which was rarely, and called even less frequently. The children had stopped asking when Daddy would visit. Maya was grateful for that, at least. Disappointment was easier to manage when it was expected. She worked 40 hours a week, sometimes more when overtime was offered. The call center was located in a windowless building on the edge of the industrial district, where she spent her shifts listening to complaints about cable bills and internet speeds, while her own problems waited patiently for her attention. She was good at her job in the way that people are good at things they have no passion for. She followed the script, resolved issues when possible, escalated when necessary, and logged off each day with nothing more than exhaustion to show for it. The apartment was small, 2 bedrooms in a complex that had been built cheaply and maintained poorly. The rent was the lowest she could find that was not actively dangerous, though even that was becoming unsustainable. Her daughter, Emma, was 10. Her son, Lucas, was 7. They deserved better than hand-me-down clothes and grocery store birthday cakes. But Maya had learned to measure success by different metrics. They were fed. They were clean. They went to school with packed lunches and homework completed. That had to be enough, because it was all she could manage. At night, after the children were asleep, Maya would sit at the kitchen table with her laptop and search for solutions that did not exist. She had applied for better jobs, dozens of them, but her resume was thin, and her lack of a college degree closed more doors than her experience could open. She had looked into assistance programs, only to discover that she made just slightly too much to qualify. The system, it seemed, was designed to help those who had fallen completely, or those who had never fallen at all. For people like her, suspended in the exhausting middle, there was only persistence. The eviction notice changed the timeline, but not the reality. Maya had known this moment was coming. The landlord had been patient longer than most would have been, but patience had its limits, and they had reached his. She needed a solution, and she needed it quickly. That was when she saw the listing. It appeared late one Thursday night as she scrolled through real estate websites with no real purpose beyond desperation. Commercial property auction, foreclosed shopping mall, minimum bid $1. The words seemed absurd, almost mocking in their simplicity. A shopping mall for $1. It had to be a mistake or a scam, some elaborate scheme to extract money from people foolish enough to believe in impossible opportunities. But Maya clicked anyway, driven by the same instinct that kept her applying for jobs she would not get and buying lottery tickets she knew would not win. Hope, she had learned, was not always rational, and sometimes it was just the refusal to accept that every door was locked. The listing loaded slowly, revealing details that did more to explain the price than to encourage interest. The Riverside Commons shopping mall had been closed for 8 years. It had suffered structural damage during a severe storm that had caused partial roof collapse in the east wing. The owner, a development company that had since dissolved, had abandoned the property after insurance disputes and mounting repair costs. The building sat on 12 acres of land in a part of the city that had seen better decades, surrounded by vacant lots and businesses that had closed when the mall did. The photographs showed exactly what the description promised: broken skylights letting rain into empty corridors, weeds growing through cracks in the parking lot, with graffiti covering walls that had once displayed bright store signs. The damage was extensive, the location unfavorable, and the cost of repair would certainly exceed any reasonable investment. It was, by every practical measure, worthless. Maya stared at the screen for a long time, her mind working through possibilities she knew were irrational. A shopping mall, even a ruined one, sat on land. Land had value, did it not? Perhaps not much in that neighborhood, but something. And the minimum bid was $1. One single dollar to own 12 acres and a building that could be sold for scrap, if nothing else. The idea took root slowly, quietly, the way dangerous ideas often do. She could bid on the property. If she won, she would own something tangible, something she could potentially sell to create a financial cushion. Even if it sold for just a few $1,000s, that would be enough to cover moving costs, first and last month's rent at a new apartment, maybe even a small emergency fund. It was not a solution, but it was possibility, and possibility was something she had very little of. She clicked through to the auction details. The sale would be held online in 2 weeks. Bidders needed to register with basic information and agree to the terms, which included taking the property as is, with no warranties or guarantees. There would be a brief inspection period for serious buyers, though the listing made clear that access was limited and dangerous due to structural instability. Maya registered before she could talk herself out of it. The form asked for her name, contact information, and acknowledgement that she understood the risks. She typed quickly, her answers honest, but bare. When it asked for her reason for bidding, she wrote simply, "Investment opportunity." It felt like a lie, but then again, desperation often required a certain flexibility with truth. Over the next 2 weeks, Maya researched the property with a focus that surprised her. She found old news articles about the mall's closure, interviews with former employees who spoke sadly of lost jobs, and city council meeting minutes discussing potential buyers who had never materialized. She discovered that the property taxes were in arrears, though not catastrophically so, and that the city had considered demolishing the structure but lacked the budget to do so. She also found the inspection date and time, listed casually in the auction details as optional, but recommended. Something made her decide to attend. Perhaps it was the need to see with her own eyes what she was considering. Perhaps it was simply the desire to do something, anything, that felt like moving forward rather than waiting to fall. The mall was located 40 minutes from her apartment, in a neighborhood she had never had reason to visit. She drove there on a Saturday morning, leaving the children with a neighbor who owed her a favor. The route took her past blocks of empty storefronts and houses with boarded windows, through streets where optimism had clearly moved elsewhere long ago. When the building came into view, Maya felt her resolve waver. The photographs had not fully captured its scale or its decay. The Riverside Commons had once been a 2-story enclosed mall with a distinctive arched roof and glass-fronted entrance pavilion. But now it loomed like a monument to failure, its facade stained by years of weather, its parking lot a cracked expanse of weeds and debris. She parked near the main entrance, where several other vehicles were already gathered. A few people stood talking in low voices, their expressions ranging from curious to calculating. Maya recognized the type immediately. Investors, flippers, people who made their living from other people's disasters. She felt suddenly out of place, a woman in a borrowed coat standing among professionals who knew what they were doing. A representative from the auction company appeared, a thin man in a reflective vest, who explained the rules with the tired efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. They would have 1 hour to walk through the accessible areas of the building. Certain sections were marked as unsafe and off-limits. Anyone who entered did so at their own risk, and the company assumed no liability for injuries. Maya signed another waiver and followed the group inside. The entrance hall was vast and dim, lit only by daylight filtering through broken skylights and gaps in the roof. The air smelled of mildew and rust, a heavy scent that coated the back of her throat. Display cases that had once held promotional materials now stood empty and dusty. Directory signs hung crooked or lay shattered on the floor. Escalators, long silent, descended into shadow like mechanical fossils. They moved as a group through the main corridor, their footsteps echoing in the hollow space. Store entrances gaped darkly on either side. Security gates rolled halfway down and jammed in place. Some stores still showed remnants of their final days. A mannequin lying on its side in what had been a clothing boutique, scattered hangers in a shoe store, faded movie posters in a theater lobby that opened onto rows of torn seats. Maya drifted away from the group gradually, drawn by a curiosity she could not fully explain. While others clustered around the representative asking questions about load-bearing walls and utility access, she walked deeper into the building, toward areas where sunlight did not reach. She passed a food court, where tables sat in silent rows, their surfaces covered in dust and bird droppings. Overhead, signs still advertised restaurants that no longer existed. A play area for children stood frozen mid-motion, its plastic equipment faded and cracked. Something about the space unsettled her, not because it was frightening, but because it was sad. This had been a place where families came, where her own children might have played if circumstances had been different. She continued walking, guided by nothing but instinct, until she reached a section of the mall that seemed less damaged than the rest. Here the ceiling was intact, the floor clear of major debris. A service corridor branched off to her left, its entrance marked with faded signs indicating deliveries and employee access only. Maya hesitated, remembering the warnings about unsafe areas. Then she stepped through anyway, her curiosity stronger than her caution. The corridor was narrow and utilitarian, lined with doors that opened into storage rooms and maintenance closets. Most were empty or filled with rusted equipment. She moved quickly, not wanting to be caught exploring restricted areas. At the end of the corridor, she found a door marked Office, Management. It was locked, but the frame was warped enough that a firm push made it swing open with a low groan. Inside was a small suite of rooms, clearly once used for administrative work. Desks still held forgotten staplers and dusty monitors. Filing cabinets stood with drawers half open, their contents scattered across the floor where water damage had made the papers swell and stick together. Maya knelt and picked up a document at random. It was a payroll report from the mall's final year. Names and numbers faded, but still legible. She set it aside and reached for another. This one a lease agreement for a store that had occupied the north wing. As she sorted through the debris, her fingers brushed against something heavier than paper. It was a ledger, bound in dark leather, its cover warped but intact. She lifted it carefully and opened to the first page, where a name was written in precise handwriting, Property holdings. Riverside Development Corporation. Maya's pulse quickened without understanding why. She turned the pages slowly, scanning columns of numbers, property addresses, purchase dates, and values. Most meant nothing to her. References to commercial lots and buildings in neighborhoods she did not recognize. But as she continued reading, a pattern began to emerge. The Riverside Commons was not just a mall. It was part of a larger portfolio, one of several properties owned by the Development Corporation. Each property was listed with its acquisition cost, estimated value, and current status. The mall appeared midway through the ledger, its entry dated nearly 30 years earlier. Beside it, in the margin, someone had written a note in the same careful hand. Primary anchor. Estate settlement pending. Maya frowned, not certain what the phrase meant, but sensing its importance. She flipped forward, looking for more references to estate settlement, and found several. Some were crossed out with notes indicating resolution. Others remained unmarked, their status unclear. On the final page of the ledger, she found something that made her breath catch. A list of beneficiaries, typed on a separate sheet of paper and tucked into the back cover. The paper was yellowed and brittle, but the text was still clear. The list included names she did not recognize, along with corresponding percentages and property references. And near the bottom, in a section marked Reserved Distributions, was her mother's name. Maya stared at the words, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. Her mother, Patricia Richardson, who had died 6 years earlier from complications related to diabetes. Her mother, who had worked as a secretary for most of her life, and had left behind little more than photographs and medical debt. Her mother's name, written in black ink on a document that suggested connection to a property development corporation Maya had never heard of. She closed the ledger carefully and sat back, her hands shaking. This could not be real. It had to be a coincidence, a different Patricia Richardson entirely. Her mother had never mentioned owning property or being connected to any development company. She had lived modestly, struggled financially, and died without a will because she had believed there was nothing of value to pass on. But the name was there, undeniable and specific, and beside it was a percentage, 18%. Maya's mind raced through possibilities, each more unlikely than the last. If her mother had been entitled to a portion of this corporation's holdings, why had no one contacted the family? Why had there been no mention of it during the estate settlement after her death? Why had Maya spent the last 6 years struggling when there might have been something, anything, that could have helped? The sound of voices approaching broke through her thoughts. Maya stood quickly, tucking the ledger under her arm and moving back toward the corridor. She did not want to be found here. I did not want to have to explain what she was doing in a restricted area, or why she was taking documents from an abandoned office. She rejoined the group just as they were preparing to leave, slipping in at the back of the crowd with the ledger hidden beneath her coat. No one seemed to notice her absence. The representative was explaining next steps for interested bidders, emphasizing again that the property was being sold as is and that all inspections were the buyer's responsibility. Maya barely heard him. Her thoughts were consumed by the ledger and what it might mean. As she drove home, the weight of it pressed against her side, a physical reminder that something impossible had just become tangible. That night, after the children were asleep, Maya spread the ledger's pages across the kitchen table and began to research. She searched for Riverside Development Corporation and found only fragments. A business registry listing showing dissolution 8 years earlier, the same year the mall closed. A handful of news articles mentioning property sales and legal disputes. References in city planning documents to projects that had never been completed. The more she searched, the more questions multiplied. If the corporation had dissolved, what had happened to its assets? Had they been distributed to the beneficiaries listed in the ledger? Or had they been absorbed by creditors? And most pressingly, if her mother had been entitled to something, why had Maya never heard about it? She found a phone number for a law firm mentioned in one of the articles, an office that had represented the corporation during its final years. She called the next morning during her lunch break, her voice steady despite the anxiety churning in her stomach. The receptionist transferred her twice before she reached someone willing to listen. The attorney who finally spoke with her was polite but cautious. He explained that he could not discuss specific client matters without proper authorization, but that if Maya believed she had a claim related to a dissolved corporation, she should submit a formal inquiry with documentation proving her connection. Maya asked what kind of documentation would be needed. He listed requirements that felt deliberately impossible: death certificates, proof of relationship, evidence of her mother's association with the corporation, and any existing estate settlement documents. She thanked him and ended the call, her brief hope deflating into something more familiar. She had stumbled onto a possibility, but turning it into reality would require resources she did not have. Still, she could not let it go entirely. That evening, she drafted a careful email to the attorney, attaching a scanned copy of her mother's death certificate and explaining the ledger she had found. She kept her tone professional, avoiding any suggestion of desperation, though desperation was exactly what she felt. She sent the email before she could second-guess herself and tried not to think about it as the hours passed. The auction date arrived before she had received a response. Maya logged into the online platform at the designated time, her laptop balanced on her knees as she sat on the couch. The children were watching television, their voices a comforting background noise that kept her grounded. The auction began with a brief overview from the auctioneer, his voice coming through the computer speakers with practiced enthusiasm. Interest, he explained, had been moderate. Several parties had completed inspections and submitted pre-bids. The property would be sold to the highest bidder above the minimum threshold of $1. Maya's finger hovered over the keyboard as the bidding opened. The first bid appeared immediately: $1, then another, $50, then $100. The numbers climbed slowly, each increment small but meaningful. $200, $300, $500. At $750, the bidding paused. Maya stared at the screen, her heart pounding. She had $1,200 in her savings account, money she had scraped together over months of extra shifts and denied expenses. It was meant for emergencies, for the inevitable moment when the car broke down or one of the children needed something she could not put off. But this was also an emergency, was it not? 30 days until eviction, no better options presenting themselves, and the possibility, however remote, that the property she was bidding on might somehow be connected to her mother's name in a ledger that suggested inheritance. She typed $1,000 and hit enter before she could change her mind. The bid registered on the screen, her username appearing beside the amount. Seconds passed. No counterbid came. The auctioneer's voice counted down. Going once, going twice. Maya held her breath. Sold. The word appeared on the screen in bold letters, followed by her username and the winning bid. $1,000. She had just bought a collapsed shopping mall. For several seconds, Maya did not move. She simply stared at the confirmation message, her mind blank with shock. Then her daughter called from the other room, asking for help with her homework, and reality reasserted itself with familiar weight. She had no idea what she had just done. No idea if it was the worst mistake of her life or the desperate gamble that might somehow, impossibly, save her. She closed the laptop carefully and went to help Emma with her math problems, her hand still trembling slightly as she checked addition problems and explained fractions. Later, after the children were in bed, she would return to the computer and begin the process of understanding what she now owned. But for that moment, unsuspended between decision and consequence, Maya allowed herself a brief flicker of something she had not felt in a very long time. Not hope, exactly, but its possibility. The confirmation email arrived at 3 a.m, waking Maya from a restless half-sleep with its cheerful ping. She read it twice by the light of her phone screen, squinting at the dense legal language that outlined her obligations as the new owner of the Riverside Commons shopping mall. Payment was due within 5 business days. The property would transfer title upon receipt of funds and completion of standard documentation. She was now responsible for all taxes, insurance, and maintenance, along with any existing liens or encumbrances not disclosed in the auction listing. The final paragraph reminded her in bold text that she had purchased the property as is, so with no warranties implied or granted. Maya set the phone down and lay back against her pillow, staring at the ceiling where shadows from the streetlight outside created shifting patterns. $1,000. It felt both impossibly small and devastatingly large. Small compared to the property's potential value, if such potential existed. Large compared to what she could actually afford to lose. She had told no one about the auction. Not her sister, who lived 2 states away and had her own family to worry about. Not her coworker, who sometimes joined her for lunch and offered sympathetic nods when Maya mentioned her struggles. Certainly not her ex-husband, who would use it as evidence of exactly the kind of poor judgment he had always accused her of. The secret sat heavily in her chest as she went through the motions of the following days. She transferred the money from her savings account, watching the balance drop to a number that made her stomach clench. She completed the electronic paperwork, signing documents she did not fully understand, but had no choice but to accept. She received the deed via email, a PDF file that represented ownership of something she could not afford to fix, sell, or properly maintain. The first person to find out was her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who watched the children occasionally and had a talent for noticing when something was wrong. She appeared at Maya's door with a container of soup and a direct question delivered in her characteristic no-nonsense manner. "You look worried more than usual," Mrs. Chen said, setting the soup on the counter without waiting for an invitation. What happened? Maya hesitated, then found herself explaining the entire situation in a rush of words that surprised her. The eviction notice, the auction listing, the ledger with her mother's name, the impulsive bid that had somehow won. She spoke quickly, defensively, as though expecting judgment. Mrs. Chen listened without interrupting, her weathered face revealing nothing. When Maya finally stopped talking, exhausted by her own confession, the older woman was quiet for a long moment. "Your mother," she said finally. "She ever mentioned this company?" Maya shook her head. "Never. She worked as a secretary, Mrs. Chen. She typed letters and filed papers. She didn't own anything." "People can surprise you," Mrs. Chen replied, "even after they're gone." She paused, not considering. "What will you do with this mall?" "I don't know," Maya admitted. "Sell it, I guess, if anyone will buy it. Maybe for scrap value or just the land. And if it's worth more than you think, then I'll sell it and finally have enough to breathe for a while." Mrs. Chen nodded slowly. "You're braver than you think you are. Stupid, maybe, but brave." She patted Maya's hand and left, taking her cryptic assessment with her. The criticism started the next day, arriving from less sympathetic quarters. Maya had mentioned the purchase in passing to a coworker during lunch, framing it as a potential investment opportunity. The news spread through the call center with remarkable speed, transforming as it passed from person to person until it returned to Maya in a form she barely recognized. "I heard you bought a condemned building," someone said in the break room, their tone mixing concern with barely concealed judgment. "It's not condemned," Maya corrected. "It's just closed." "Same thing, isn't it?" Why would you spend money on something like that? She tried to explain about the land value, the potential for resale, but her words sounded weak even to her own ears. She could see it in their faces. They thought she had made a desperate, foolish choice. They were probably right. Her sister called that evening after someone from the old neighborhood, connected through the mysterious networks that small communities maintain across distances, had passed along the news. The conversation began with concern and escalated quickly into frustration. "Maya, what were you thinking? Oh, you can't afford this." "I can't afford not to try something," Maya replied, her voice tight. "But a shopping mall? A collapsed shopping mall? Do you have any idea what something like that costs to maintain? The liability alone." "I'm aware of the risks," Maya interrupted. "I'm not stupid." "I didn't say you were stupid. I said you were desperate. There's a difference." The call ended badly, with her sister promising to talk about this later, in a tone that suggested lectures were being prepared. Maya sat with her phone in her hand long after the screen went dark, feeling the familiar isolation of someone who has made a choice that others cannot understand because they have never been desperate enough to consider it. The eviction deadline continued its approach with mechanical inevitability. 23 days, 20, 15. Maya worked her shifts, helped with homework, made dinners from ingredients that stretched further each week. She avoided thinking about the mall except when she could not, which was constantly. Then the email arrived. It came from the law firm she had contacted weeks earlier, the subject line reading, simply, Estate Inquiry. Richardson. Maya opened it with hands that had forgotten how to stay steady. "Dear Ms. Richardson, thank you for your inquiry regarding the Riverside Development Corporation and your mother's potential association with the entity. After reviewing the documentation you provided, along with our internal records, I can confirm that Patricia Richardson was indeed listed as a minority beneficiary in the corporation's dissolved estate. However, I must inform you that all distributions from the corporation were completed following its bankruptcy proceedings 8 years ago. Assets were liquidated to satisfy creditors, and remaining holdings were distributed according to the priority structure established in the bankruptcy settlement. As a minority stakeholder, your mother's claim would have been addressed during this process. Our records indicate that notification letters were sent to all listed beneficiaries at their last known addresses. If your mother did not respond or could not be located, her potential distribution would have been classified as unclaimed and subject to state escheat laws. I would recommend contacting the state's Unclaimed Property Division to determine if any funds were transferred on her behalf. Please note that such claims typically require extensive documentation and can take several months to process." Maya read the email 3 times, each pass revealing new layers of frustration. Her mother had been entitled to something. Distribution letters had been sent to addresses her mother probably never saw, living as she had in a series of small apartments that changed whenever rent increased beyond her means. The money, if it had existed, had vanished into bureaucratic processes designed to protect corporations from the complexity of tracking people who moved frequently or died quietly. She drafted a response asking for more specific information: dates, amounts, addresses where letters had been sent. She kept her tone professional despite the anger building in her chest. This was her mother's legacy, however small, and it had been processed away as though she had simply failed to care enough to claim it. The attorney's response came 2 days later, apologizing that he could not provide additional details without a formal legal representation agreement, which would require retainer fees she could not afford. He wished her luck with the unclaimed property search and closed with the kind of polite dismissal that felt like a door being gently but firmly shut. Maya spent an evening on the state's unclaimed property website, searching every variation of her mother's name, every address she could remember. Nothing appeared. Either the funds had never been transferred, or they had been claimed by someone else, or they existed in some filing cabinet waiting for paperwork she did not know how to complete. Frustration crystallized into determination. She had bought the mall on instinct and hope, following a connection she could not fully explain. Now she would see it through, not because she believed in fairy tale endings, but because she had already committed the money, and the momentum was easier to maintain than to stop. She needed to see the property again, needed to understand what she actually owned beyond photographs and legal descriptions. The deed listed the parcel numbers, the square footage, the zoning classification. But none of that told her what the mall might still hold, or what she could realistically salvage from it. The following Saturday, she made the drive again, this time bringing the children. Emma sat in the passenger seat asking questions Maya could not answer, while Lucas played a game on a borrowed tablet in the back, for they had been told only that they were going to see a building Mommy had bought, which Emma immediately understood meant something had gone wrong. "Are we going to live there?" Emma asked, her voice small and worried. "No, honey. It's just a property I might be able to sell." "Why did you buy it if you're just going to sell it?" "It's complicated. That's what you always say when you don't want to explain." Maya sighed. "You're right. I bought it because it was cheap, and I thought maybe I could make some money from it. That's called an investment. Did it work? I don't know yet. The mall looked worse in daylight without the distraction of an organized tour." Maya parked in the cracked lot and sat for a moment, taking in the full scope of what she had purchased. The building stretched across the landscape like a beached ship, its once proud facade now streaked with stains and decay. Sections of the roof had visible holes. The main entrance pavilion was missing most of its glass, the metal frames twisted and corroded. Emma stared at it with wide eyes. "This is it? This is it. Mommy, it's really broken." "I know, baby." They walked the perimeter slowly, Maya keeping the children close and away from areas where debris made footing unstable. Lucas ran ahead occasionally, fascinated by the sheer scale of abandonment. Emma stayed near, her hand finding Maya's when the shadows grew too deep or the silence too strange. Maya noticed things she had missed during the brief inspection. Loading docks at the rear of the building, some still accessible. Utility boxes and junction points that suggested the property still had infrastructure connections, though likely disconnected. A drainage system that ran along the eastern edge, clogged with leaves and debris but structurally intact. She also noticed how much of the land surrounding the mall was actually clear and usable. The parking lot was damaged, but vast, easily 10 acres of paved surface that could be repurposed or redeveloped. The location, while not prime, was not as isolated as the listing had suggested. She could see the highway in the distance, and several large warehouses had been built in recent years nearby, suggesting that commercial interest in the area had not completely died. As they circled back toward the entrance, Emma pointed to something Maya had not seen before. "What's that?" Following her daughter's finger, Maya spotted a small outbuilding near the northwest corner of the property. It was separate from the main structure, easily overlooked behind overgrown landscaping. A service building, perhaps, or a maintenance shed. They approached it carefully. The door was locked, but a window panel had been broken, allowing a view inside. Maya peered through, shielding her eyes from the sun's glare. Inside, she could make out filing cabinets, a desk, shelving units covered in dust. Another office. More documents probably rotting into illegibility. But something made her want to see inside anyway. The same instinct that had led her to the management office during the inspection. The same pull that had brought her to the auction in the first place. "Stay here," she told the children. "Mommy, don't go in there," Emma pleaded. "I'm just going to look through the window better. I'm not going inside." She circled the outbuilding, checking other windows. looking for another way to see what was stored inside without having to break in. At the rear, she found a door with a rusted padlock that had corroded so badly the hasp barely held. A firm pull separated it from the frame entirely, the metal crumbling in her hand. The door swung open, releasing a breath of stale air that smelled of paper and concrete. Maya hesitated, glancing back at the children who watched from a safe distance. Then she stepped inside. The office was small and remarkably preserved, protected from the worst of the weather by an intact roof and sealed windows. Dust covered everything in a thick layer, but beneath it the space remained organized. The filing cabinets were locked, but the desk drawers opened easily. Inside the top drawer, Maya found pens dried to uselessness, paper clips, and a calendar from 8 years ago, its pages frozen on the month the mall closed. The second drawer held maintenance logs, carefully recorded sheets tracking repairs, inspections, and work orders. She flipped through them quickly, noting the dates and the names of contractors. The bottom drawer stuck. Maya pulled harder, and it finally gave way with a reluctant scrape. Inside were several folders, their tabs labeled in the same precise handwriting she had seen in the ledger. The first folder contained property tax records going back 15 years. The second held insurance documents, most marked as lapsed or canceled. The third was thicker, marked estate documents, RDC. Maya's breath caught. She lifted the folder carefully and opened it on the desk, saw her hands leaving marks in the dust. Inside were copies of legal filings related to the Riverside Development Corporation's dissolution, bankruptcy petitions, asset schedules, creditor claims. And buried near the back, a document titled Distribution Schedule for Minority Stakeholders. Her mother's name was there again, this time with more detail. Patricia Richardson, 18% beneficial interest, entitled to proportional distribution of remaining assets after priority claims satisfied. Beside the entry was a handwritten note. Attempted contact at last known address. Returned. Status: unclaimed pending location. Maya sat down heavily in the dusty chair, her eyes fixed on the words. Her mother had been entitled to 18% of whatever remained after the corporation's debts were paid. But no one had been able to find her to deliver the notice because her mother had moved 3 times in the 2 years before she died, always chasing lower rent, always one step ahead of collection agencies. The money, if there had been any, had never reached her. It had been classified as unclaimed, and according to the attorney's email, it had likely been transferred to the state's unclaimed property division, where it now sat, waiting for someone who knew to look for it. But that was not the detail that made Maya's heart pound. It was the line item 2 pages further in, a casualty list titled Final Asset Dispositions. Among the properties sold to satisfy creditors was the Riverside Commons shopping mall, purchased by a holding company for $22,000. The holding company had attempted to develop the property, failed, and eventually dissolved, leaving the mall to foreclosure auction. And now Maya owned it, had purchased it for $1,000, a property that had once been part of a corporation in which her mother had held 18% interest. She did not understand all the legal mechanisms at work, did not fully grasp how ownership had passed from entity to entity. But she understood one thing clearly. She was standing in a building that had once been connected to her mother's name, holding documents that proved her mother had been entitled to something that was never delivered. Maya gathered the folders carefully and carried them outside where the children waited. Emma looked at her with concern. "Did you find something?" Maya nodded slowly, not trusting her voice yet. "Is it good or bad?" "I don't know yet, baby. But it's something. And sometimes, something is enough." They drove home in silence, the folders stacked on the passenger seat beside her. Maya's mind raced through possibilities and questions in equal measure. The documents proved her mother's connection to the property. They did not prove Maya had any legal claim beyond what she had already purchased, but they suggested that her mother's inheritance, lost to bureaucracy and circumstance, might have always been tied to this mall. Perhaps not in money. Perhaps not in any way that would survive legal scrutiny, but in something harder to define and impossible to dismiss. Intention. Legacy. The stubborn persistence of connections that refuse to dissolve even when everything else does. That night, after the children were asleep, Maya spread all the documents across her kitchen table. The ledger from the management office, the estate files from the outbuilding, the emails from the attorney. She arranged them in chronological order, building a timeline that stretched from her mother's mysterious connection to a development corporation, through decades of dissolution, bankruptcy, and ultimately to her own impulsive bid at an online auction. The story they told was incomplete, but it was undeniably hers. And for the first time since the eviction notice arrived, Maya felt something shift inside her, not certainty, but something more powerful. The absolute refusal to accept that this was coincidence, that she had stumbled into ownership of this property by chance alone. She had 18 days until the eviction deadline. She had a collapsed mall, a stack of old documents, and a growing conviction that her mother's lost inheritance was somehow still waiting to be claimed. Not in money held by the state, but in something hidden within the property itself. Something that had survived 8 years of abandonment for exactly this moment. Something that had been waiting for her to find it. The conviction grew stronger over the following days, settling into Maya's thoughts with the persistence of truth. She could not explain it rationally, could not point to any specific evidence that justified what she was beginning to believe. But the feeling would not leave her. Her mother had been connected to this property. Her mother had been entitled to something that was never delivered. And now Maya owned the very building at the center of that unfinished story. It was not logic. It was something older and deeper, the kind of knowing that came from patterns recognized in hindsight, the way everything had aligned, the eviction notice arriving just before she found the auction listing, the ledger appearing in an office she had no practical reason to enter, the outbuilding revealing documents that confirmed what the ledger had suggested, each piece clicking into place with a precision that felt less like chance and more like choreography. Maya began visiting the mall regularly, driving out after work and on weekends when the children were with Mrs. Chen or occupied with homework. She told herself she was conducting a proper survey of the property, assessing what could be salvaged or sold. But the truth was more complicated. She was searching for something without knowing what it was or where it might be hidden. She walked the corridors with a flashlight, moving through stores one by one. She climbed stairs carefully, testing each step before trusting her weight to it. She explored the basement levels, where delivery tunnels connected to loading docks, finding only empty pallets and the remnants of broken equipment. The mall revealed its history in fragments, a 1990s time capsule of retail ambitions and community gathering spaces. Skylights designed to flood the interior with natural light, now admitting rain and birds. Architectural details that suggested someone had once cared about more than profit. Decorative columns, curved balconies, a central fountain dried and filled with debris that might have been beautiful when water flowed. But nothing that suggested hidden value. No forgotten inventory worth selling. And no equipment valuable enough to justify the effort of removal. Just the slow decay of a place that had outlived its purpose. Still, Maya kept searching. On the 7th visit, she brought a crowbar, not to destroy anything, but to open doors that had been sealed or jammed. She started with the administrative wing, methodically working through offices that had once housed mall management, accounting, and security operations. Most contained exactly what she expected. Broken furniture, obsolete computer equipment, filing cabinets filled with payroll records and vendor contracts from a dead company. She photographed what seemed important, though she was not certain why. In the security office, she found a wall of monitors, their screens dark and cracked. Beneath them was a control panel that had once managed the mall's camera system. She examined it briefly, noting that some of the wiring appeared newer than the building itself, as though someone had upgraded the system shortly before everything shut down. A detail that felt significant, though she could not say why. She moved on to the maintenance department, a warren of rooms filled with tools and repair supplies. Here, the disorder was worse. Someone had clearly looted what they could carry. Copper wiring stripped from walls, valuable tools removed, anything worth reselling already gone. What remained was the infrastructure too heavy or complicated to steal easily. Water heaters still bolted to the floor. HVAC units rusting in place. An electrical panel that probably contained nothing of value, but at least represented the skeleton of systems that had once kept the building functioning. Maya stood in the maintenance supervisor's office, a small room barely large enough for a desk and a single filing cabinet. The walls were covered in schematics and diagrams, blueprints showing the mall's electrical systems, plumbing, ventilation. She studied them with the focus of someone trying to solve a puzzle without knowing what the finished picture should look like. One schematic caught her attention. It showed a section of the basement marked Utility Access. Restricted, with lines indicating electrical conduits running to a space that was not labeled on the building's public floor plans. A blank area roughly 20 feet by 30, located beneath what had been the food court. Maya compared the schematic to other blueprints hanging nearby. The space appeared consistently across different diagrams: electrical, plumbing, HVAC. Each system routed connections to it, but none explained what it was or why it existed. She photographed the schematics carefully, making sure to capture every detail. Then she made her way to the basement. The food court level was one floor down from the main mall, accessed by a wide staircase that had once been flanked by potted plants and promotional displays. The descent took her into deeper shadow, the sunlight from broken skylights above fading to a dim glow that barely reached the lower level. Emergency lighting had long since failed. Maya moved carefully, her flashlight beam cutting through darkness thick enough to feel solid. The food court opened before her, a cavern of empty vendor stalls and overturned tables. The air here was cooler, damp with the smell of mold and stagnant water. According to the schematic, the utility access point should be located behind the kitchen area of what had been a chain burger restaurant. Maya found the space easily enough, its service counter still recognizable despite the damage. She moved behind it into the kitchen, where industrial equipment sat like monuments to efficiency, stoves and fryers and refrigeration units too heavy to move. At the far wall, she found what she was looking for: a metal door marked Authorized Personnel Only. It was locked with a keypad entry system, its LED display dark and dead. Maya examined the mechanism. The keypad was connected to a separate power source, a small battery backup unit that had long since drained. But the lock itself was mechanical, a deadbolt that could theoretically be manipulated if she knew how. She did not know how, but she had brought the crowbar. It took 15 minutes of careful prying, working the frame rather than the lock itself, before the door finally gave way with a metallic shriek that echoed through the empty food court. Maya froze, listening for any response, though she knew she was alone. The sound faded into silence, leaving only her breathing and the distant drip of water somewhere in the darkness. She pushed the door open slowly. Beyond was a corridor, narrow and industrial, its walls bare concrete. Unlike the rest of the basement, this space showed no signs of water damage or deterioration. The air was dry, almost stale, as though it had been sealed away from the building's decay. Maya moved forward, her flashlight revealing a space that extended farther than the blueprints had suggested. The corridor opened into a small room, maybe 12 feet square, completely empty except for a door on the far wall. This door was different from the others. Heavy steel, secured with a mechanical combination lock rather than a keypad. The surface showed no rust, no damage, suggesting it had been protected from the environment somehow. Maya stared at it, her pulse loud in her ears. This was it. She knew it with the same certainty that had brought her to the mall in the first place. Whatever had been hidden here, whatever her mother's 18% interest had entitled her to, it waited behind this door. She photographed the lock, noting its make and model. Then she stepped back and considered her options. She could not open it herself, did not have the tools or knowledge. But she could find someone who did. A locksmith, perhaps, or someone willing to cut through the door if necessary. The question was whether she should. Whether opening this space would solve her problems or create new ones she could not predict. Maya thought of the eviction notice, now down to 11 days. She thought of Emma's worried questions and Lucas's attempts to pretend nothing was wrong. She thought of her mother, working as a secretary, living modestly, dying with the belief that she had nothing of value to leave behind. She took out her phone and began searching for locksmiths who specialized in commercial security systems. Whatever was behind this door had waited 8 years. It could wait a few more days while she found a way to open it safely. But it would not wait forever. And neither could she. The locksmith arrived 3 days later. A middle-aged man named Frank, who drove a van covered in magnetic decals advertising 24-hour emergency service. Maya met him in the mall's parking lot, watching as he surveyed the building with the practiced skepticism of someone who had seen too many questionable jobs. "You own this?" he asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer would be complicated. "I do. Bought it at auction." Maya handed him the deed, which she had started carrying everywhere as proof against the disbelief she encountered constantly. Frank examined the document briefly, then nodded. "What needs opening?" "A door in the basement. Combination lock. Commercial grade. I don't have the combination." "Most people don't when they call me." He gathered his equipment, a substantial toolkit, a drill with various attachments, and something he called a manipulation rig that looked like a stethoscope attached to measuring instruments. "Lead the way." They descended into the basement together, Frank moving carefully, but without the hesitation Maya had felt on her first visit. He had clearly worked in worse places. When they reached the locked steel door, he spent several minutes examining the mechanism, running his fingers along the edges, testing the weight. "This is quality hardware," he said finally. "Not the kind of thing you put on a utility closet. What were they protecting?" "I don't know. That's why I need it open." Frank made a sound that might have been approval or concern. Maya could not tell which. He set up his equipment methodically, explaining as he worked that he would try manipulation first before resorting to drilling. "Drilling's faster, but it destroys the lock. If you want to secure this again after, manipulation's better." Maya had not considered that she might want to secure it again. The thought suggested a future in which she owned this property long enough to care about protecting what was inside. That future felt impossibly distant. Frank worked in concentrated silence, his ear pressed against the door as he turned the dial with minute precision. Occasionally he would pause, adjust something, and start again. The process was hypnotic in its focus, each movement deliberate and patient. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. Frank straightened, rolled his shoulders, and resumed the process from a slightly different angle. Maya watched, fighting the urge to pace or ask questions. or she understood instinctively that this required the kind of attention that could not be interrupted. At 42 minutes, something clicked. The sound was soft but definitive, a mechanical yielding that Frank acknowledged with a slight smile. "First tumbler," he said. 3 more to go. The remaining tumblers fell more quickly, as though the lock had decided cooperation was inevitable. At 59 minutes, Frank turned the handle and stepped back. "There you go. It's all yours." Maya paid him in cash from the emergency fund she could no longer afford to have, adding a tip that made him raise his eyebrows, but not comment. He packed his equipment efficiently, offered a business card in case she needed anything else opened, and left her alone with the unsealed door. She stood in the empty corridor for several minutes after his footsteps faded, gathering her nerve. The door waited with the same patience it had maintained for 8 years. Whatever was inside had not been disturbed since the mall closed. That meant it could wait a few more minutes while Maya steadied herself. Finally, she reached out and pulled the door open. The room beyond was smaller than she had expected, perhaps 10 feet by 12, with walls of reinforced concrete and a ceiling hung with dust-proof fixtures that had never activated. The air that escaped was cool and remarkably clean, filtered through a ventilation system still connected to a backup power source that had somehow survived. 3 metal shelving units occupied the space, arranged in a U-shape that maximized storage while leaving a narrow aisle for access. The shelves were loaded with boxes, dozens of them, each labeled in the same precise handwriting Maya had seen in the ledgers. She stepped inside carefully, her flashlight sweeping across the labels. Estate documents, financial records, property holdings, asset inventories. The boxes were uniform, commercial-grade storage containers designed to protect their contents from moisture and decay. Each was sealed with tamper-evident tape that showed no signs of disturbance. Maya pulled down the box, labeled estate documents first, setting it on the floor where she could examine it properly. The tape resisted briefly before giving way with a sharp crack. Inside were files organized with the same meticulous attention to detail she had come to expect. The first folder contained incorporation papers for the Riverside Development Corporation, dating back 34 years. The second held partnership agreements listing the founding members, none of whose names Maya recognized, except one. Patricia Richardson, Administrative Officer, 18% equity stake. Maya's hands trembled slightly as she read the document. Her mother had not been a secretary for this company. She had been an officer, one of the founding partners. The equity stake was not a courtesy or a token gesture. It was a substantial ownership position. The file explained how the partnership had formed, with each member contributing specific resources. Some provided capital, others provided property or expertise. Patricia Richardson's contribution was listed as administrative oversight and financial record-keeping, along with an unspecified asset valued at the time at $180,000. Maya sat back, trying to reconcile this information with the mother she remembered. Patricia Richardson had worked as a secretary, yes, but apparently not in the way Maya had understood. She had worked for her own company, managing its operations, keeping its records. The modesty Maya had attributed to limited means might have been something else entirely. Choice, perhaps, or protection. She opened the next box, labeled Financial Records 1990 to 2008. Inside were ledgers tracking the corporation's income, expenses, and asset acquisitions. The early years showed modest but steady growth. Properties purchased strategically, developed or improved, then either held or sold for profit. The corporation had specialized in distressed commercial real estate, buying properties others dismissed and finding value through patience and careful management. The Riverside Commons appeared in the ledgers from year 3, acquired at foreclosure auction for $95,000. Over the following decade, the corporation invested another $200,000 in improvements and maintenance, transforming a failed retail space into a community anchor. The mall generated reliable income until the storm damage 8 years ago, at which point everything began to unravel. Maya traced the decline through subsequent ledgers: the insurance dispute that left repair costs uncovered, the loans taken against other properties to cover operating expenses, the gradual sale of assets to creditors as the situation deteriorated, and finally, the bankruptcy filing that dissolved the corporation and scattered its holdings. But the boxes in this room represented something different. These were not the official records filed with the court. These were the originals, the complete documentation that someone had deliberately preserved, separate from the legal process. Maya opened a third box and found what she had been hoping for without daring to expect: asset inventories from the year before dissolution, complete with appraisals and valuations. The corporation had owned 17 properties at its peak. By the time of bankruptcy, only 6 remained. The others sold to satisfy creditors. Of those 6, the Riverside Commons was the largest, but according to the appraisals, not the most valuable. That distinction belonged to a parcel of undeveloped land in what was now the city's rapidly gentrifying warehouse district. Maya's pulse quickened as she read the appraisal. The land had been purchased 15 years earlier for $32,000. At the time of the corporation's dissolution, it was appraised at $190,000. A note in the margin indicated the property had been sold during bankruptcy proceedings for $140,000, with the proceeds distributed to creditors. But something about the notation felt wrong. Maya checked the date of sale against the bankruptcy timeline and found a discrepancy. The land had been sold 2 months before the bankruptcy filing was finalized, during the period when assets were supposedly frozen pending court approval. She dug deeper, pulling files that referenced the warehouse district property: bills of sale, transfer documents, closing statements. And finally, a handwritten note clipped to a folder marked "Irregular Transactions." The note was dated 8 years ago, written in careful script that matched the other documents. It explained that certain assets had been transferred during the dissolution process through methods that were legally questionable but practically necessary. The warehouse district parcel had been sold quietly to a buyer who understood its true value, with the proceeds divided among the minority stakeholders before the bankruptcy court could intervene. Patricia Richardson's share, according to the note, had been $34,200. The money had been held in a secure account pending her location and claim. When she could not be found, the funds had been transferred according to a secondary plan outlined in the partnership agreement, a clause designed to protect partners who might be displaced or unavailable during corporate dissolution. The secondary plan was simple: unclaimed distributions would be converted to physical assets and stored securely until claimed by the designated beneficiary or their legal heirs. Maya turned the page and found an inventory list titled "Richardson Distribution: Secured Assets." Her breath stopped. The list detailed items purchased with her mother's unclaimed distribution, converted from cash to tangible holdings that would not diminish in value over time. Gold coins, collectible currency, investment-grade precious metals. Each item was cataloged with dates of purchase, storage location, and current market estimates as of 8 years ago. Total value at time of storage: $34,200. Maya stood slowly, and her flashlight sweeping the room with new understanding. The boxes on the shelves were not all documents. Some were labeled differently: storage, precious metals; storage, numismatic holdings; storage, emergency assets. She moved to the nearest box marked for storage and opened it with hands that had forgotten steadiness. Inside, wrapped in protective cloth and secured in custom foam inserts, were gold coins: American eagles, Canadian maple leaves, South African krugerrands. Each coin was sealed in its own protective capsule, pristine and untouched. The box contained 50 coins. Maya did rough mental math based on what she knew gold was worth currently. The calculator on her phone confirmed her estimate. 50 one-ounce gold coins at current market rates represented approximately $100,000. And there were 4 more boxes marked for precious metals storage. Maya opened them one by one, documenting the contents with photos, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. Gold bars in various weights, silver coins by the roll, platinum ingots sealed in factory packaging. Each item labeled, cataloged, preserved with the same meticulous care that had characterized every other aspect of this hidden archive. The numismatic boxes contained rare currency, uncirculated bills from discontinued series, error notes, commemorative issues with documented scarcity. Maya knew nothing about collectible money, but the documentation included recent auction results and dealer price guides. Even conservative estimates suggested substantial value. By the time she finished her initial inventory, 3 hours had passed. Maya sat on the floor surrounded by boxes and documentation, trying to calculate what she was looking at. The numbers kept changing as she rechecked her math, unable to believe her own conclusions. The gold alone was worth close to $400,000 at current market rates. The silver added another $40,000. The platinum was worth approximately $30,000. The rare currency, depending on market demand and authentication, could be worth anywhere from $50,000 to double that. Conservative estimate, $520,000. Optimistic estimate, $650,000. Her mother's 18% interest in a dissolved corporation, converted to physical assets, and stored in a locked room beneath a collapsed shopping mall, I had multiplied in value by more than 15 times over 8 years of patience. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Chen, asking if she would be home for dinner. The normalcy of the question felt surreal against the weight of what surrounded her. She responded that she would be late, offered no explanation, and turned off her phone. She needed time to think, to understand what this meant, and what she should do next. The documents made clear that the assets had been secured specifically for her mother, with provisions allowing transfer to legal heirs if properly claimed. Maya was the sole surviving heir. Her mother's will, such as it was, had left everything to her daughter. These assets, legally speaking, should belong to Maya. But ownership and possession were different things, so she could not simply load these boxes into her car and drive away. The gold alone weighed too much to move casually, and converting it to cash would require authentication, documentation, questions about provenance that she was not certain she could answer cleanly. More immediately, she had 9 days until the eviction deadline. The discovery changed nothing about that timeline. She still needed money quickly, still needed a solution that did not require months of legal process. She thought about taking a few coins, just enough to cover immediate expenses. But instinct warned against it. Partial liquidation would draw attention and raise questions. She needed to approach this methodically, with the same careful planning that had preserved these assets for 8 years. Maya spent the next hour photographing everything. Every box, or every label, every document that explained what was stored here and why. She documented the condition of the room, the ventilation system still functioning, the security of the space. When she finished, she had over 200 photos representing proof of what existed in this sealed room. Then she began researching. Precious metals dealers, numismatic authentication services, estate liquidation specialists. She made notes, compared options, created a mental flowchart of steps that would need to be taken to convert these assets into usable funds. The process would take time, weeks at minimum, possibly months if authentication proved complicated. But it could be done. and the amounts involved meant she could afford to be patient and strategic rather than desperate. She called Mrs. Chen and explained she would not be home until late. So then she called a security company and arranged for an emergency consultation the following morning. She would need this room secured properly, with modern locks and monitoring, before she left it for any extended period. As evening settled over the mall, Maya sealed the room again, testing the lock Frank had opened to ensure it still functioned. She made her way back through the darkening building, past empty stores and silent corridors, her mind already working through next steps. The mall was no longer just a burden or a gamble. It was a vault, and she was the heir who had finally discovered what it protected. That night, Maya called her sister. The conversation started poorly, her sister's voice carrying the same frustrated concern it had held since learning about the mall purchase. I don't want to hear about it being a good investment," her sister said before Maya could speak. "I want to hear that you figured out how to avoid getting evicted." "I have," Maya replied, her voice steady. "I found something in the property." "Found what? Asbestos? Black mold?" "Assets. Stored assets. Connected to Mom." The silence that followed was long enough that Maya checked to see if the call had dropped. Then her sister spoke, her tone shifted into something more careful. "What kind of assets?" Maya explained, choosing her words with precision. She described the locked room, the documents, the careful inventory of precious metals and rare currency. She did not mention specific values yet, waiting to see how her sister responded to the basic facts. "This doesn't make sense," her sister said finally. "Mom never had anything like that. She could barely afford her medication." "I know, but the documents are clear. She was a founding partner in a development corporation. She had an 18% stake. When it dissolved, her share was converted to physical assets because they couldn't locate her." "Why couldn't they locate her?" "She moved 3 times in 2 years. You remember? She was always chasing cheaper rent." Her sister was quiet again, processing. "How much are these assets worth?" "I'm not sure yet. I need to get them authenticated. But conservatively, several $100,000. The number hung between them, too large to feel real. Her sister's voice, when it came back, was tight with emotion Maya could not quite identify. "Several $100,000? Yes." "And it's definitely Mom's?" "Legally?" "According to the documents, yes. There's a clear chain showing it was set aside for her and can transfer to heirs." "Maya, this is—" Her sister trailed off, unable to complete the thought. "You need a lawyer. You need someone to verify all this before you do anything." "I know. I'm working on it." "Don't move anything. Don't touch anything. Not until you have proper legal advice." Maya smiled despite herself. "I won't. I promise." After the call ended, she sat with the strange reality of what she had just done. She had told someone, made it real in a way it had not been when it existed only in her knowledge. The secret was expanding, acquiring witnesses, beginning its transformation from discovery to consequence. The security consultation the next morning confirmed what Maya already knew. The room needed better protection. The security specialist, a woman named Torres who had worked in corporate loss prevention, examined the space with professional thoroughness. "You're storing valuables here?" Torres asked. "Documents and some physical assets. Family inheritance." Torres nodded, her expression revealing nothing. "You'll want motion sensors, a reinforced door, upgraded locks with monitoring. I can have it installed in 48 hours if you authorize it now." The cost made Maya wince, but she authorized it anyway. What was $3,000 in security when protecting assets, worth hundreds of thousands? The mathematics had shifted entirely, and with it, her tolerance for risk. While Torres took measurements and made notes, Maya returned to the room and began a more detailed inventory. She created a spreadsheet on her phone, logging each item with corresponding documentation. The work was tedious, but necessary. When she eventually needed to prove ownership, thoroughness would matter. She discovered additional boxes she had missed during the first examination. One contained personal items, photographs, letters, a small jewelry box, with pieces that looked more sentimental than valuable. These had been stored alongside the financial assets, suggesting someone had tried to preserve her mother's life in more than just monetary terms. Maya opened the jewelry box carefully. Inside were items she recognized: a watch her mother had worn daily, a locket containing faded photos of Maya and her sister as children, as a pair of earrings her mother had called her fancy jewelry, despite their modest quality. And underneath those familiar items, wrapped in protective cloth, was a ring Maya had never seen before. The band was platinum, set with a single diamond that caught the flashlight beam with remarkable clarity. It was the kind of piece her mother never would have worn, too expensive and too formal for the life she had lived. Maya turned it over and found an inscription engraved inside the band: PRM, RDC, 1991. Patricia Richardson Mitchell, her mother's maiden name. The date was the year after the corporation formed. This had been a gift, or a purchase, marking something significant, then stored away and forgotten, or deliberately saved. Maya added it to the inventory, noting its probable value based on the stone's size and clarity, on several $1,000s at least, possibly more with proper appraisal. Just one more piece in a puzzle that kept expanding. The work continued through the afternoon. Maya methodically documented everything, creating backup files and emailing copies to herself. She would not risk losing this information to a dropped phone or computer failure. This was her proof, her claim, her evidence that everything had happened exactly as she described. By evening, she had a complete inventory. The conservative estimate had been accurate, somewhere between $500,000 and $600,000 in assets, plus whatever the rare currency and jewelry appraised for. It was enough to change everything, enough to pay off debts, secure stable housing, create a genuine emergency fund, enough to stop living one disaster away from collapse. But converting the assets to cash remained the challenge. Maya began making calls to precious metals dealers, describing hypothetically what she had and asking about their authentication and purchase processes. Most were professional but cautious, explaining that large quantities required documentation proving legal ownership and source. One dealer, recommended by an online forum for collectors, was more helpful. He explained the standard process: authentication of the items, verification of ownership documentation, agreed upon pricing based on current market rates, and purchase with funds transferred after a brief holding period to ensure everything was legitimate. "How long does it usually take?" Maya asked. "For the quantity you're describing?" 2 to 3 weeks from initial consultation to payment. Could be faster if your documentation is clean and the items are common grades. Could be longer if there are complications. 2 to 3 weeks. Maya had 8 days until eviction. "What if I needed to move faster? What would that take?" The dealer was quiet for a moment. "Faster usually means selling at a discount. Some buyers will pay immediately, but want 15 to 20% below market rate. It's legal, but you lose significant value." Maya did the math quickly. 20% off $500,000 was $100,000 in lost value. But even at that discount, she would walk away with $400,000 immediately available. It was still generational wealth compared to what she had started with. Still more money than she had ever imagined having access to. "Let me think about it," she said. "Can I call you back?" "Of course. But Miss Richardson, whatever you decide, don't try to sell this much metal without proper documentation. The IRS and other agencies monitor large, precious metal transactions. Do it right, or you'll create problems worse than whatever you're trying to solve. Maya thanked him and ended the call, absorbing the warning. She could not simply liquidate the assets for cash and hope no one noticed. This would need to be done properly, legally, with paper trails and tax filings and all the complications that came with sudden wealth. The irony was not lost on her. She was potentially wealthy, but still facing eviction because the wealth was locked in forms that could not be quickly converted. She sat in the sealed room, surrounded by boxes worth more money than she would earn in 15 years of work, and tried to think clearly. There had to be a solution that provided immediate funds while preserving the assets' full value. Mrs. Chen called as Maya was locking up the mall for the evening. "The children want to know if you're coming home for dinner." "I'll be there in 40 minutes, Maya promised. "Good. They need to see you. They're worried." "I know. I'm fixing it, Mrs. Chen." "Are you? Because from where I sit, you're spending a lot of time at a building that's falling down." Maya almost told her everything, almost explained what she had found, what it meant, how close they were to security. But something stopped her. Not distrust, but caution. The assets were still locked in a room, still theoretical until converted, still vulnerable to complications she could not yet predict. "I'm fixing it," she repeated. "Oh, trust me." "I trust you," Mrs. Chen said. "I just don't trust luck, and this feels like you're depending on luck." Maya drove home thinking about that assessment. Was this luck? Finding the ledger, buying the mall, discovering the locked room, uncovering her mother's hidden inheritance? Or was it something more deliberate, a pattern she had been pulled into by forces that had been waiting for exactly the right moment and exactly the right person? She did not believe in fate, but she was beginning to believe in preparation. Her mother had prepared, whether consciously or not. Someone in the corporation had prepared, preserving the assets and creating mechanisms for their transfer. And now Maya was the beneficiary of all that preparation, thrust into a situation she had not sought but could not walk away from. At home, Emma and Lucas greeted her with the casual affection of children who had learned not to ask too many questions when their mother looked stressed. They ate dinner together, talked about school, watched television until bedtime. Maya went through the motions with practiced ease, keeping her voice light and her expression calm. After the children were asleep, she returned to her research, this time focusing not on dealers, but on loans secured by precious metals. The concept was simpler than liquidation. Use the gold and silver as collateral for a loan that could be repaid over time, as the assets were properly sold. Several companies offered such loans, though the terms varied widely. Interest rates ranged from reasonable to predatory. Loan-to-value ratios were typically conservative, offering 60 to 70% of the collateral's appraised worth, but the approval process was faster, sometimes as quick as 72 hours with proper documentation. Maya made notes, comparing options. A loan of $300,000 against $500,000 in collateral would more than solve her immediate problems. She could pay off debts, secure housing, and have breathing room while the remaining assets were liquidated properly. The catch, as always, was documentation. She would need to prove ownership, provide provenance, demonstrate legal right to use the assets as collateral. That meant lawyers, estate claims, possibly court filings to establish her position as heir to the secured assets. Time she did not have. Maya leaned back in her chair, exhaustion washing over her. She was so close, and closer than she had been to stability in years, perhaps ever. But close was not the same as there, and the gap between the two felt impossibly wide. Her phone buzzed with an email. The subject line read, "Re-estate inquiry follow-up." It was from the law firm she had contacted weeks ago, the one that had initially brushed her off with bureaucratic courtesy. Maya opened it expecting another polite dismissal. Instead, she found something different. Ms. Richardson, I am writing to follow up on our previous correspondence regarding the Riverside Development Corporation estate. After your recent inquiries, I reviewed our files more thoroughly and discovered information I believe may be relevant to your situation. Our firm retained copies of the estate distribution schedule that was never fully executed due to inability to locate certain beneficiaries. Your mother, Patricia Richardson, was indeed listed as entitled to distributions that remained unclaimed at the time the estate was closed. However, I have discovered that the partnership agreement included a specific clause regarding unclaimed distributions. Rather than transferring them to the state, they were to be secured in a designated location, pending claim by beneficiaries or their legal heirs. I am not at liberty to discuss specific details without proper legal representation, but I wanted to inform you that if you have located assets matching the description of secured distributions, your claim as heir may be stronger than my previous email suggested. Abwak, I would recommend consulting with an estate attorney to establish your claim formally. If you proceed in that direction and require documentation from our files, we would be willing to cooperate within appropriate legal parameters. The email continued with contact information and a disclaimer about attorney-client relationships, but Maya barely read it. The key message was clear. The law firm knew about the secured assets, knew about the storage provisions, and was essentially confirming that Maya had legal grounds to claim them. It was not a guarantee, but it was validation, arriving exactly when she needed it most. Maya saved the email and began composing a response, requesting copies of any documentation that would support her claim. She was careful with her wording, acknowledging the firm's constraints while making clear she intended to pursue the matter formally. Then she searched for estate attorneys, filtering by those who offered free consultations. She found 3 in her area with decent reviews and scheduled appointments with all of them for the following week. 7 days until eviction. But now she had a path forward, narrow and complicated, but real. Maya allowed herself a moment of something she had not felt in longer than she could remember. Not quite hope, not yet, but its possibility, approaching from a distance, becoming more defined with each step she took toward it. The assets were real. Her claim had support. The law firm was cooperating. Solutions existed. She just had to move fast enough to reach them before the deadline caught up with her. And for the first time since the eviction notice arrived, Maya believed she actually might. The estate attorney Maya met with on Monday morning was younger than she expected, a woman in her early 40s with an office that suggested competence without pretension. Her name was Jennifer Moss, and she listened to Maya's story without interrupting, taking notes in precise handwriting that reminded Maya uncomfortably of the documents she had found. When Maya finished, Jennifer set down her pen and regarded her with an expression that was difficult to read. "You understand, this is an unusual situation. I understand that I found assets my mother was entitled to, but never received. Assets stored in a property you now own, which complicates things. Normally, unclaimed inheritance go through specific legal channels. This bypassed all of them. The partnership agreement allowed for it," Maya said, handing over copies of the documents she had photographed. The secured storage provision was built into the original incorporation papers. Jennifer reviewed the documents slowly, her expression shifting from skeptical to interested. "These appear legitimate, but I'll need to verify them against the original filings. That will take time." "How much time?" "A week minimum, possibly 2. Maya felt her stomach drop. "I have 6 days until I'm evicted." Jennifer looked up sharply. 6 days? "Yes. That's why I need to know if there's any way to access these assets immediately, even partially." Miss Richardson, the legal process doesn't accelerate because of personal deadlines. If you try to liquidate assets before establishing clear ownership, or you'll create problems that could take years to resolve. So what am I supposed to do? Let myself get evicted while sitting on $500,000 in gold? Jennifer's expression softened slightly. I understand your frustration, but there may be alternatives. Have you considered a bridge loan secured by the potential inheritance? From who? Banks don't loan money against maybes. Private lenders might, especially with documentation this strong. The risk is higher, so interest rates would be significant. But it would give you immediate funds while we formalize your claim. Maya leaned forward. How do I find these lenders? I can make some calls, but you need to understand what you're agreeing to. Private loans can have terms that are difficult to manage if things don't resolve as expected. Things will resolve. Those assets are mine legally. Legally is different from practically. There could be challenges, other potential heirs, questions about the storage arrangement, the IRS taking an interest in suddenly discovered wealth. Each possibility felt like a door closing. Maya forced herself to breathe steadily. What would you recommend? Jennifer was quiet for a moment, clearly weighing professional caution against practical need. I would recommend establishing your claim formally through estate proceedings, which takes time you don't have. So practically, I would recommend securing a short-term private loan to stabilize your immediate situation while we work through the proper channels. It's not ideal, but it's viable. Can you help me find a lender? I can make introductions. The rest will depend on the terms they offer and whether you're willing to accept them. Maya nodded. Make the calls. Jennifer spent the next hour on the phone while Maya waited, trying not to calculate how quickly her remaining days were disappearing. The attorney spoke in the careful language of professionals discussing risk and opportunity, explaining Maya's situation without revealing more than necessary. By noon, Jennifer had 3 potential lenders interested in discussing terms. All required appraisals of the assets before committing. All wanted documentation proving Maya's ownership of both the property and the stored materials. And all operated on timelines that made Maya's 6-day deadline feel impossibly tight. The fastest is a firm called Apex Capital Solutions, Jennifer explained. They specialize in estate-secured lending. They can have an appraiser on site within 24 hours and potentially fund within 48 if everything checks out. But their rates are high. How high? 12% annually with a 3-point origination fee, and they'll only loan 50% of appraised value. Maya did the math quickly. 50% of $500,000 was $250,000. Minus the 3-point origination fee, she would actually receive about $242,000. Still more than enough to solve her immediate problems, but the interest would be substantial. What's my alternative? Wait 2 weeks for a more favorable lender who'll need complete legal documentation first. Then I'll go with Apex. Jennifer made the call. The conversation was brief and businesslike, for an appraiser would arrive the following morning at 9. Maya would need to provide access to the storage room and all documentation proving her claim to the assets. The appraisal would take several hours. Results would be available by end of business day, and if approved, funding could occur within 36 hours. That would put actual money in Maya's account Thursday evening, 2 days before the eviction deadline. Tight, but possible. Maya left the attorney's office with a mixture of hope and anxiety that felt almost physical in its intensity. She had set things in motion, committed to a path that had costs and complications, but also potential resolution. Whether that potential would materialize in time remained uncertain. She returned to work that afternoon, slipping back into her cubicle and logging into the call center system as though nothing extraordinary was happening. The normalcy was almost comforting. Complaints about billing errors and service interruptions required nothing from her except patience and script adherence. For 8 hours, She could pretend her life was not balanced on the edge of transformation or disaster. Her co-worker, the one who had spread news about the mall purchase, approached during the afternoon break with poorly concealed curiosity. "How's your investment property doing?" Maya measured her response carefully. "Still working through it." "I heard you had to hire a locksmith. That must be expensive." The comment confirmed what Maya had suspected. People were talking, speculating, so probably laughing about the single mother who bought a collapsed building and was now throwing good money after bad. "It's a process," Maya said evenly. "These things take time." "Well, I hope it works out for you. Really, I do." The tone suggested otherwise, carrying the satisfaction of someone watching a bad decision confirm itself. Maya returned to her calls without responding, focusing on the scripts and procedures that required nothing from her except mechanical competence. She thought about what she could say to erase the skepticism, to announce that she had found something worth more than a year of their salaries combined. But the timing was wrong, the risks too high. Better to let them believe what they wanted until she had proof that could not be dismissed. The appraiser from Apex Capital Solutions arrived Tuesday morning with equipment that looked more sophisticated than Maya had anticipated. He introduced himself as Richard, declined small talk, and asked immediately to see the assets and documentation. Maya led him through the mall to the secured room, now protected by the upgraded locks and monitoring system Torres had installed. She unsealed the door and stepped back, letting Richard enter first. He worked methodically, examining each box, testing samples of the gold and silver with electronic instruments, photographing items from multiple angles, taking detailed notes. The process had a ritualistic quality that Maya found both reassuring and nerve-wracking. This was real evaluation, the kind that would determine whether her claim had substance or was built on misunderstanding. "The metals are genuine," Richard said after 2 hours. "Gold content is consistent with stated grades. Silver as well. The platinum will need more specialized testing, but preliminary analysis suggests authenticity." "What about the rare currency?" "That's outside my expertise. I can photograph and document it, but you'll need a numismatic specialist for proper appraisal. Based on the condition and the documentation here, I'd estimate conservative value in the 40,000 to 60,000 range, but that's preliminary." Maya nodded, adding that to her mental calculations. Richard continued his assessment through the afternoon, weighing items, cross-referencing against market rates, building his appraisal report piece by piece. Maya waited in the corridor, answering questions when needed, otherwise staying out of his way. At 4:30, he packed his equipment and turned to face her. "My preliminary assessment is that you have approximately $480,000 in precious metals based on current spot prices. The numismatic items could add significant value, but require separate evaluation. The jewelry is worth perhaps $15,000 to $20,000. The number was lower than her most optimistic estimates, but higher than she had feared. "When will I have the formal appraisal?" "It'll be ready by end of business today. Apex will review it tomorrow and make their lending decision. You should hear something by tomorrow afternoon." Maya thanked him and watched him leave, carrying with him the evidence that would determine whether her gamble paid off in time to matter. That evening, she told the children they might not have to move after all. Emma's relief was visible and immediate. Lucas asked if that meant they could stay in their school, and when Maya said yes, he smiled for the first time in weeks. "Did you sell the big broken building?" Emma asked. "Not exactly, but I found something inside it that's valuable." "Like treasure?" Maya smiled despite herself. "Something like that." Wednesday morning arrived with an email from Apex Capital Solutions. The subject line read simply, "Loan approval. Action required." Maya opened it with hands that trembled slightly. The message confirmed approval for a loan of $240,000, secured by the appraised assets. Terms were, as Jennifer had described, 12% annual interest, 3-point origination fee, minimum 6-month term before early repayment allowed. Funding would occur upon completion of security documentation and verification of ownership claims. The attached documents required her signature in 17 places. Maya read each section carefully, noting clauses about default, collection procedures, and the lender's rights to the collateral if terms were not met. It was aggressive lending designed to protect the company's interests above all else. But it was also money. Real, accessible money that would arrive in her account within 48 hours. She signed electronically and returned the documents before she could second-guess herself. Thursday morning, Jennifer called with an update. The ownership documentation is strong enough for Apex's purposes. They're satisfied you have legal claim to the property and the assets stored there. Funding should process this afternoon. This afternoon? You're sure? Barring any last-minute complications, yes. You should see the deposit by close of business. Maya spent the day in a state of suspended tension, checking her bank account every hour despite knowing nothing would appear until the end of the day. She went through work motions mechanically, her attention fragmented between customer calls and the phone in her pocket that would alert her when the deposit arrived. At 4:47, her phone buzzed. Bank notification. Deposit received. $242,650. Maya stared at the screen, reading the number again and again, as though it might change or disappear. $242,650. More money than she had ever imagined having access to, appearing in her account with the same casual efficiency as her bi-weekly paycheck. She excused herself to the restroom and locked herself in a stall, breathing slowly while her heart pounded against her ribs. It was real. The money was real. The nightmare of eviction, of choosing between rent and food, of watching her children pretend everything was fine, was ending. She allowed herself 2 minutes of silent, overwhelming relief. Then she dried her eyes, straightened her clothes, and returned to her desk to finish her shift. That evening, she paid rent, not just the current month, but 3 months in advance, along with all arrears and late fees. The total came to $4,800, a number that would have been insurmountable 3 days ago and was now barely noticeable against her new balance. She called the landlord personally to confirm payment and provide reference numbers. His surprise was audible. "Miss Richardson, I received the payment. This is unexpected." "I've resolved my financial situation," Maya said simply. "I'm glad to hear it. I'll notify the court that eviction proceedings are no longer necessary." "Thank you. And I'd like to discuss a lease renewal. Month to month is no longer acceptable. I want a 1-year lease with stable terms." There was a pause. "Of course. I can have new paperwork drawn up." "Good. I'll expect it by Monday." Maya ended the call feeling something she had not experienced in years. Not power exactly, but its close relative, security. The ability to make demands rather than plead for mercy. She paid off her credit cards next, and watching balances that had tormented her for months drop to 0. Medical bills followed, each payment made with careful documentation for her records. By the time she finished, she had spent $18,000 and eliminated every piece of debt that had been crushing her. Her bank balance still showed over $220,000, an amount so large it felt abstract, like a number from someone else's life. Friday morning, Maya requested a meeting with her supervisor. She had worked at the call center for 4 years, accepting whatever shifts were offered, never complaining about the monotony or the difficult customers. She had been reliable because she had no choice. Now she had choices. "I need to reduce my hours," she told her supervisor. "I can work 30 hours a week instead of 40. No overtime. No weekend shifts." Her supervisor frowned. "Is there a problem?" "No problem. I just need better work-life balance for my family." Miss Richardson, I appreciate your work, but part-time positions have different benefit structures. You'd lose some of your health coverage. I understand, but I'm not requesting part-time. I'm requesting a reduction from 40 hours to 30. If that's not possible, I'll need to consider other opportunities. The words came out more confidently than Maya felt, but she held her ground. She knew the call center struggled with turnover, knew her experience and reliability had value. She was no longer desperate enough to accept whatever was offered. Her supervisor agreed to discuss it with management. Maya thanked her and returned to her desk, unaware that relationships had shifted in ways that would take time to fully understand. The news about her financial turnaround spread through the call center with the same speed the mockery had traveled weeks earlier. But the tone was different now, colored by confusion and reassessment. People who had dismissed the mall purchase as foolish desperation now whispered questions about what she had actually found there. Her coworker approached again during lunch, her earlier satisfaction replaced by curiosity, edged with envy. I heard you're reducing your hours. Did you sell the property? Not yet, Maya replied, but I found assets stored there that belonged to my mother. Assets? Like what? Maya smiled slightly. Family inheritance. It's complicated. Must have been valuable if you can afford to work less. It was. Very valuable. The admission hung in the air between them, a quiet assertion that Maya's gamble had not been foolish after all. Her coworker nodded slowly, clearly recalculating her assessment of the situation, and walked away without further comment. That afternoon, Maya's sister called. The conversation began tentatively, both of them navigating around the tension from their last discussion. I heard you might have resolved things with the eviction, her sister said. I did. I secured a loan against the assets I found. The eviction's been canceled. Maya, I'm glad. Really glad. I was worried. I know you were. I'm sorry I was so negative about the mall purchase. I thought you were making things worse. You thought what anyone would think. It looked like a terrible decision. But it wasn't. No, Maya agreed. No, it wasn't. Her sister was quiet for a moment. What are you going to do now? Get the assets properly authenticated and sold. Pay off the loan. Figure out what comes next. Do you need help? I could come visit. Help with the kids while you handle everything. The offer surprised Maya. Her sister lived 2 states away and rarely visited, always claiming work or family obligations made travel difficult. You don't have to do that. I know. But I want to. You've been dealing with this alone long enough. Maya felt emotion tighten her throat. Thank you. That would help. After the call ended, she sat with the unexpected warmth of family support, something she had learned not to expect, but had not stopped wanting. The weekend passed in a strange suspension of normalcy. Maya took the children to the park. I'd bought groceries without calculating every item's cost, paid for Emma's field trip without hesitation. The actions were small, ordinary, but each one reinforced that something fundamental had changed. Monday morning brought the first numismatic appraisal. The specialist, an older man who had been authenticating rare currency for 30 years, spent 4 hours examining the bills and coins Maya had stored in the secured room. His assessment confirmed what the documentation suggested. The collection included several genuinely rare pieces, error bills, and commemorative issues that had appreciated significantly over 8 years. Total value, $68,000. Combined with the precious metals already appraised, Maya's inheritance was worth approximately $550,000. Oh, and that did not include the mall property itself, which still sat on 12 acres of land that might have value beyond its collapsed structure. Jennifer recommended a commercial real estate appraiser to evaluate the property independently. That appraisal came back Wednesday with surprising results. The building itself was worth little beyond scrap value, But the land, located in an area seeing renewed commercial development, was appraised at $170,000. Maya owned assets worth over $700,000. She had purchased them for $1,000 3 weeks earlier. The realization settled over her slowly, not as euphoria, but as profound disorientation. Her entire life, shaped by scarcity and limitation, was being rewritten by numbers she could barely comprehend. When Jennifer began formal estate proceedings to establish Maya's legal ownership of the stored assets, independent of the property purchase. The process would take several months, but with the appraisals and documentation, Jennifer was confident it would succeed. In the meantime, Maya could proceed with controlled liquidation. The precious metals could be sold to reputable dealers at close to spot price. The rare currency would go to specialized auction houses, where collectors would drive prices higher than dealer offers. The jewelry would be sold separately. The timeline stretched over 3 months. By summer's end, Maya would have converted everything to cash, paid off the bridge loan with its aggressive interest, and still have over $450,000 remaining, life-changing money, and a generational wealth for a family that had never had any. Maya met with a financial advisor Jennifer recommended, a soft-spoken man who specialized in helping people manage sudden wealth. He asked about her goals, her timeline, her risk tolerance. Together, they built a plan. A portion invested conservatively for the children's education, another portion for home purchase, the remainder in balanced investments that would generate modest but stable returns. No extravagance, no dramatic lifestyle changes, just security, carefully constructed and protected. The transformation did not happen all at once. It accumulated in small, steady changes that compounded over weeks. Maya moved from her cramped apartment to a modest house with a yard. Not in an expensive neighborhood, but in a safe one with good schools. She bought reliable furniture to replace the second-hand pieces she had accumulated over years. She established emergency funds and college savings accounts. She quit the call center after giving proper notice and finding a position with better hours and slightly better pay at a company that valued work-life balance. The income mattered less now, but the principle remained important. She wanted to work, wanted to contribute, wanted her children to see that security did not mean idleness. The people who had doubted her learned of her success through the same informal networks that had spread mockery. Some congratulated her genuinely. Others offered retroactive support, claiming they had always believed in her. Maya accepted both with the same measured courtesy, revealing nothing of what she truly felt. Her ex-husband called 6 weeks after the eviction deadline had passed, his voice carrying forced casualness. "I heard you bought some property. That true?" It was. "I've since liquidated most of the assets." "Assets? What kind of assets?" "Family inheritance. Nothing that concerns you." "If it affects the kids, it concerns me. Are you planning to move them?" "I already moved them. To a house with better schools." "Without discussing it with me?" Maya felt old anger rise but pushed it down. "You haven't been involved in decisions about the children in 3 years. I'm not starting now." He made noises about legal rights and custody arrangements, but Maya knew he would not follow through. He never did. The call ended with vague threats that would dissolve into silence within days. Mrs. Chen was the only person outside family who knew the full story. Maya told her one evening over tea, explaining everything from the auction to the locked room to the final liquidation. The older woman listened without interrupting, her weathered face revealing little. When Maya finished, Mrs. Chen nodded slowly. "Your mother was smarter than people knew." "I think so. I just wish she could have benefited from it herself. Maybe she did. Maybe knowing it was there, even if she couldn't access it, gave her something to hold on to." Maya had not considered that possibility. "You think she knew?" "I think people know more than they show. And your mother loved you. Maybe this was her way of making sure you'd be okay even after she was gone." The thought sat with Maya through the evening and into the days that followed. Her mother had been a founding partner in a development corporation, not just a secretary. She had made decisions, contributed assets, earned equity. And when circumstances prevented her from claiming her distribution, someone in that corporation had ensured it would be preserved for whoever came next. Perhaps her mother had known. Perhaps she had carried that knowledge quietly, unable to access it herself, but trusting it would surface when needed. Perhaps the whole chain of events, from Maya's desperate auction search to the discovery of the ledger, had been set in motion by a mother's careful planning years earlier. Maya would never know for certain, but she chose to believe it anyway. 3 months after the eviction deadline that never came, Maya returned to the mall one final time. The building still stood, a more decrepit than before, waiting for whatever would come next. She had decided to sell the property rather than attempt development. The land had value, and someone else could determine how best to use it. She walked through the empty corridors, remembering the fear and hope that had driven her here initially. The stores were still vacant, the skylight still broken, the fountain still dry. Nothing about the physical space had changed, but everything about what it meant had transformed completely. This building had been her mother's investment, had held her mother's legacy, had waited patiently for the moment Maya needed it most. It was not coincidence. It was preparation, meeting opportunity, past meeting, present, struggle meeting resolution. Maya stood in the secured room one last time, now empty except for the storage boxes she would donate to archives. The gold and currency were gone, converted to security and possibility. But the space itself remained, a testament to careful planning and patient hope. She sealed the room and locked it, leaving everything as she had found it except for what she had claimed. Someone else would discover this space eventually, would wonder what it had contained and why it existed. They would not find treasure, but they would find evidence of intention, of someone choosing to believe in future possibilities even when present circumstances suggested otherwise. That, Maya thought, was its own kind of legacy. As she drove away from the mall for the last time, she thought about what she would tell her children when they were old enough to understand. Not just the facts of what had happened, but the meaning beneath them. That sometimes preparation looks like foolishness. That sometimes security is built slowly, invisibly, by people who will never see its benefits. That sometimes the most important inheritance is not money, but the belief that circumstances can change. Her mother had given her that. Not just wealth, but the proof that persistence and careful planning could outlast difficulty. That what looked like limitation might be protection. That loss could transform into opportunity if you were willing to recognize it. Maya thought about the eviction notice that had started everything, folded now in a drawer she rarely opened. A piece of paper that had represented disaster 3 months earlier, and now felt like the catalyst that had pulled her life in an entirely new direction. She had not been lucky. No, she had been desperate enough to try something that looked foolish, careful enough to investigate what she found, and determined enough to see it through when obstacles appeared. That was not luck. That was something she had earned. Emma asked that evening if they could visit Grandma's grave. They had not been since shortly after the funeral, the cost of flowers and the emotional weight both too much for Maya to manage, alongside everything else. Of course, Maya said. This weekend. They went Saturday morning, bringing flowers that Maya did not have to count the cost of. They stood at the modest headstone, while Maya tried to find words for what she wanted to say. Grandma left us something, she told the children finally. She was part of a business that helped her save money for us. It took a long time for us to find it. But when we did, it changed everything. Is that why we have a house now? Emma asked. Yes, that's why. Grandma was smart, Lucas said with the certainty of a 7-year-old. She was, Maya agreed. Very smart. They stayed a while longer, each lost in their own thoughts. Then they went home to the house that inheritance had purchased, to the life that discovery had made possible, to the future that preparation had protected. Maya had started with nothing but desperation and a $1 bid. She had ended with security, possibility, and proof that her mother's quiet strength had outlasted even death itself. It was not the ending she had imagined when the eviction notice arrived, but it was the one she had earned, step by careful step, through the collapsed mall that had held her mother's final gift. And that made it perfect. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.